Okay, this is a sound check. If you can hear me, could you let us know? Send us a chat or an email and let me know if the sound is right and if you can read the board. There was a huge traffic jam. Actually, it wasn't a huge traffic jam. It was a huge accident. There was an 18-wheeler truck that was crunched up and turned upside down, and at least 3 or 4 cars totally mangled, and one car was up in the air as I passed because they had a crane pulling it out like this on the highway. I was 45 minutes getting 2 miles from my house to the accident, and then 30 minutes to get here from the accident. It was crazy. So if you can hear me, please let us know and we'll start the class. Looks good? Okay. I am hoping this will be our last class on Levis. Not because I don't like Levis, but because we are starting a new book next week. And the new book is called The Practical Imagination: Stories, Poems, and Plays. And this book is an anthology of short works of literature. And we're going to start at the beginning, and I will read the critical information and pass it on to you, and also tell you the stories, and we'll talk about the stories. So I hope you will like the new course starting next week. I also wanted to let you know that I have 4 students from Brazil staying in my house now. And we're having a lot of fun. We're having English class every day, and we are trying to record most of the classes so that I will be able to make them available online to people who want to do self-study English. Now, before I told you, in fact, Alessandro, we're going to have to change this on the website. Before I told you that I was going to have 3 classes, one for basic level, one for intermediate, and one for advanced. We're not going to do it that way. That turned out to be too difficult, technically. So we're going to have, I'm going to have a website, and anyone who wants to self-study English can subscribe to a members area of my website, and in the members area will be all the classes that I put up, and they will be growing. Additional lessons will be added regularly. And you can choose whichever kind of lesson you want to take. And there will be one subscription price, unlimited access to all files. So that's how we're going to do it. And I hope very soon it will be operational. So stay tuned on that.
I have a question for Marie.
Question.
Can anyone who is not a student of Seminário de Filosofia watch those basic English classes?
The question is, can anybody who is not a student of the philosophy seminar still watch the basic courses? The answer is yes. I am going to have my own website separate from Olavo. And that website, the address will be margaritanoyes.com. The website is already up, but it is not fully functional. margaritanoyes.com. Soon, you will be able to subscribe to the members only area through my website, and anybody can do it. And it will be good for people whose English is not up to advanced level. Yes, you don't have to be a philosophy student. It will be just regular English. Any other questions, just let me know here. Okay. By the way, I'll tell you one funny thing that happened when we were trying to record a lesson for the website. It was a vocabulary lesson. And the idea was that a person who studies in another country will learn one name for a given item. For example, you would say this is a pen. But when you get to the United States, you find out there's 10 different words for every one thing. So this is a pen, this is a marker, this is a dry erase marker. There are lots of words for different varieties of things. And I wanted the students to be able to know the name in English of everything in the house. So I gave them a list of strange things, and they were supposed to run around and find the things and bring them back to the camera and say, this is a marker, this is an eraser, whatever it is, this is a lamp. Well, my son, who is 15 years old, and my daughter, Michelle, who's 21, were language helpers. If the student didn't know what the article was, they were supposed to ask my kids. And my son became bored and decided he wanted to leave. So he stood up to walk away. And I said, come back, come back. And he said, no, no. I said, then go do the dishes. And he said, no, no. And he said, this is how you handle a mother. And he came back into the frame and pushed me. And I went flying out. And then he started to speak to the camera. And he gave an introduction of himself, and he began to tell his philosophy of life. Meanwhile, the students kept running into the frame saying, this is an eraser. And then they would run away, and the boy continued speaking. So he went on for like 10 minutes talking about his philosophy of life. So I don't know whether we will really put that one up on the website or not. But everybody who was there thought it was hysterically funny. So I'm having a lot of fun with this. And maybe I'll put it on the website as a blooper. Blooper reel. Blooper reels are portions of film where mistakes are made, and they tend to be funny. So maybe I'll put that whole lesson up as a blooper reel. Well, let's get into our Levis book. Oh, you want to hear one more sad story about the online class? Today, I did a 2-hour seminar on composition with the students, and we were video recording it for you. It was advanced composition. It turns out that we turned the camera off at the beginning instead of turning it on. And we missed, a huge section was missed. And the other portion that we did get, the lamp, the overhead light was making a buzzing noise. And it's so loud that we probably won't be able to use it. So after 2 hours, we got nothing to put up. So maybe I'll re-record it, just me speaking to you, and teach you the same material. But you won't get to hear the sound of the students interacting. We worked on an Aesop's fable today to rewrite it in English using a compositional technique that I'll probably teach and put into the members only area of my website. I hope all of you will, well, it depends on how good your English is, whether you'll enjoy coming or not. But let's finish Levis now. Okay, we are on page 52, and we're in the last paragraph, and we did the first half of the last paragraph last week. So we're going to do the second half of the last paragraph right now, and then we'll turn back to the beginning and remember different ideas to summarize our long study, and then we'll be finished. So I'll read the full paragraph now, beginning on 52, last paragraph. Here then is the significant upshot for us. The situation changes. And to regard change with Professor Plum as the death of the past would be to contemplate with equanimity the death of the present, which the future rapidly becomes. The roots of tradition that still has some life in it are not dead. The full range of the English language is there in its incomparable literature, accessible to English speakers, at any rate in this country, and waiting to be proved living. A new conception of the university as society's organ for a new function presses for realization. A conception that develops life's urgent enough ennui of the new kind of effort needed if mankind is to save, for future growth, its full humanity. What, I have argued, the conception entails is the creating of an educated public that, conscious of its responsibility, shall maintain the language of creative thought and keep the full potentiality alive. Here's where we begin our study tonight. The notion that the currently applauded American writers prove the vitality of the civilization that produced them is absurd. By the way, I need a pencil. Do you have a pencil lying around anywhere, Alessandro? I should never begin without a pencil in my hand. Thank you so much. Okay, the notion that the currently applauded American writers prove the vitality of the civilization that proved them is absurd and significant. What, characteristically, they demonstrate is a depressing and often repellent poverty in the range of experience. Satisfaction and human potentiality they seem to know of and to think all. Actually, that didn't make sense the way I read it. Let me reread that sentence. What characteristically they demonstrate is a depressing and often repellent poverty in the range of experience, satisfaction, and human potentiality they seem to know of and to think all. As for the famed and flattered American critics who write about the British English classics, they seem, judged by what they say about them, unable to read them. The language of heuristic thought that major literature depends on is too alien. It bears no relation to the human world they know, or to the kinds of intellectual apparatus they are familiar with, and too practiced in applying. And the beginning of the next paragraph points out that the second part of this book gives a demonstration of judgment and analysis. Okay, let's go back to the beginning of the section that we're studying tonight. It's in the middle of the paragraph, beginning with the words, "the notion that the currently applauded American writers." Okay, find that? The notion. Notion means idea. The idea. The idea. What idea? The idea that the currently applauded American writers prove the vitality of the civilization. Okay, so the idea is that the writers prove the legitimacy, is that the word it used? No, the vitality. Okay, writers prove vitality. That is the core of the idea. The idea which he says is absurd and significant. What kind of writers? The currently applauded American writers, right? Currently applauded. I'm going to diagram this. The old style diagramming. Applauded. What kind of writers? Applauded writers. Applauded is an adjective for writers. How are they applauded? Currently. That means now. N-O-W, now. Okay, the currently applauded writers. Those who are being applauded right now. Applauded meaning praised, appreciated, loved, written about. This kind of writer, these American writers, by the way, currently suggests that they are applauded for a short time only. In the past, they wouldn't have been, and in the future, they won't be. It's a fad. It's a fad to applaud them. They are a narrow taste. Currently applauded American writers. So, these people prove the vitality of the language, of the civilization. How would these people prove the vitality of the civilization? They would prove the vitality, by having creative thoughts. If a woman gives birth to a baby, that is proof that her husband is potent, assuming she doesn't have a boyfriend. If these writers do good things, that is proof that the civilization that gave birth to these writers is alive. Okay? Another word for prove would be legitimize. Legitimize. Make legitimate. The first day that one of the Brazilian students arrived to our house, he came to a party at our house on New Year's Eve, and he met my son, who said he would teach him a word a day. And the first word he taught the Brazilian to say in English was legit. Hey, that's legit, man. That's legit. Legit. Legit means okay, cool, good, legitimate. So, these American writers prove that our society is legit. That's the idea. Okay? They prove the vitality, the potency of the American society, because they're American writers. Okay, that idea, the notion that the currently applauded American writers prove the vitality of the civilization that produced them. Okay, so it's of the civilization that produced them prove the vitality of the civilization that approved them. This entire idea is absurd and significant. It's absurd and it's significant. In what sense is it absurd? Well, we will see in the rest of the paragraph what Levis thinks about these American writers, which everybody is currently applauding. Significant. Why is it significant, this notion? Well, in my opinion, it is significant because it shows that people cannot see the value or lack of value in the comments of these American critics and American writers. A few years ago, my daughter went to college, and she was required to take a course in American literature. And the stories that were selected to be studied in this course were terrible. They were so bad. In fact, they were stories I would not have permitted her to read when she was young. Mind-bending, horrible, soul-wrenching stories. I would almost say evil stories. And all the stories were the same in that they all had a gut-wrenching evil at the core. And my daughter almost refused to take this course, and she wrote a letter to the school dean of the department complaining that worthwhile literature was not being studied and these terrible stories were being studied. And the answer that came back was that the selection of literature was at the discretion of the teacher. The teacher had the right to choose what stories he or she wanted to teach. Well, these stories, which made it into literary anthologies, did not prove to me the vitality of the civilization that gave birth to the author or the professor who chose them. So the notion that the writings of the American authors of Levis's day proves the vitality of the American civilization. According to Levis, that notion is absurd, but also significant. Let's read on. Here we have the sentence that I had trouble making sense of. Let's see if I can make more sense of it now. What, characteristically, they demonstrate. is a depressing and often repellent poverty in the range of experience, satisfaction, and human potentiality they seem to know of. Human potentiality they seem to know of. And to think all. Okay, I'm going to see if I can take this sentence apart and figure out how it fits together so that it makes sense. It's not completely clear to me what everything refers to. Okay, the main core, what characteristically they demonstrate is a depressing and often repellent poverty. Okay, we are previously said that these writers prove the vitality of the civilization. Levis says no. Instead, what they demonstrate, instead of vitality, of civilization, they demonstrate, these authors is the they, demonstrate poverty. Now, poverty in this case means lack, absence. I'll write that in. Lack of something. Absence of something. Okay? A lack or an absence of something. Okay, this much is clear from the sentence. But of what is the question? A lack of, actually it's a depressing and repellent lack of, depressing and repellent poverty in the range of experience satisfaction and human potentiality they seem to know of. Experience, satisfaction, and human potentiality. And I believe all of these are what they seem to know of. Okay, remember, we're talking about a range of these things. So, if the range of experience in real human life is this broad, these people demonstrate a poverty in the range of experience that they seem to know of. So, instead of this rich experience, maybe they only know this much of it. That's how much they know of human experience. It's a poverty. They're missing all of this. It's a lack. It's an absence. So they demonstrate, instead of demonstrating vitality, they demonstrate poverty. They only have this much knowledge of the range of experience, satisfaction, and human potential that they seem to know about. They only know about this. They don't know a single thing about the rest of it. What don't they know about? Maybe they don't know about joy and love. Maybe they don't know about God. and religion and morals. In here, in the American writers, you see a lot of nihilism. I don't remember how to spell nihilism. ISM. Nihilism. You don't see God and morals. In fact, they look down on it. You don't see joy and love and life in that sense. You see only this depressing, horrible worldview. It's very narrow. So you see a poverty of the range of experience, satisfaction, and human potential that they seem to know of and think all. That means they think that this is all there is, but in fact, this is only a very narrow slice. So what Levis says is that instead of demonstrating the vitality of the civilization that produced the American authors, they demonstrate a poverty or a lack in their range of experience and satisfaction and human potential that they seem to know of and think all. And this range that they demonstrate and this poverty is depressing. Depressing. I found it very depressing reading my daughter's literature, and often repellent. Repellent. Repellent means, ugh, that's horrible. I hate that. Ugh. Repellent. So, the idea that these applauded American authors demonstrate the vitality of our situation is absurd. What in fact they demonstrate is a poverty in the range of human experience that they seem to know about and they think it's everything. Okay, moving on to the next sentence. As for the famed and flattered American critics who write about the British English classics, they seem, judged by what they say about them, unable to read them. Okay, we're moving from the authors to the critics. So the authors demonstrated a poverty of knowledge, a poverty of experience. Let's see what he says about the critics. By the way, Olavo says that there are no more literary critics functioning today. He says what is functioning as criticism is just like light book reviews and summaries. There aren't any real good literary critics anymore at all. But in Levis's day, they had literary critics. So now we're talking about the literary critics. And the literary critics who would read the British English classics, and he puts that in parentheses because to him, they're the classics. And also, I don't know. So, American literary critics who attempt to read the masterpieces of English literature from the British tradition. That's how I would say it. Okay, of these people, they seem, judged by what they say about them, unable to read them. Okay, the literary critics seem, unable to read the classics. I'll say them. That's the heart of the sentence. The literary critics seem unable to read the classics. Now, one of the things I taught the students today in composition class was to begin with a sentence like this, a core sentence which is simple and bold and direct and active, and then add content. So how does Levis add content? The famed and flattered American critics. So what kind of critics? Famed and flattered. Famous and flattered. People are always sucking up to them, telling them they're terrific. These are people with a big head. As for them, this construction means, what about them? Let us focus for the moment on them. That phrase, as for them, it means we are now going to focus on them. As for them, the famed and flattered literary critics who write about the British English classics, who write about the British English classics. And remember, he uses these to sort of give an ironic tone because he doesn't approve of British English classics. He just thinks they're the classics of English literature. These are the same people. They seem unable to read them, judged by what they say about them. So, in what sense do they seem unable to read them? Well, we judge by what they say of them or about them. So, these people who are famed and flattered write about the British English classics. Levis reads what they have written, and based on what they have said, he judges these people can't even read these stories. They're totally wrong about what they say critically. So wrong that you get the impression they're incapable of understanding the story themselves at all. Next sentence. The language of heuristic thought that major literature depends on is too alien. Now, I have read this sentence about 8 times in the past 2 weeks, and each time I thought, what does heuristic mean? And I wasn't handy to my computer, so I didn't look it up. So I'm going to ask, Alessandro, would you quickly look up the word heuristic unless you know the meaning of it? And he'll tell us what it means, because I don't like to have a word that I can't remember the meaning of. I remember looking this up before, when the same word came up before, but I don't remember the definition.
Heuristic. Survey to find out or discover something.
A survey to find out or discover something.
Serving
to find out or discover something. The language of heuristic thought that major literature depends on is too alien. serving to find out or discover something. Do you have any other definitions there?
Yeah. Second definition is of or pertaining to heroism in education. And heroism in education means the educational practice or principle of training pupils to discover things for themselves.
Okay. Discover for yourself is the thrust of the word, apparently. Okay. And I remember in our reading of Levis that a big part of language is its ability to evoke creative and original thought in someone else. For example, in poetry, a few words can create a wealth of images in a hearer. And a story, a simple story, can evoke deep thought and great wisdom in a hearer, as that hearer takes the ideas creatively and works with them. So the language of heuristic thought would be living language, I would think. Living language. Language capable of begetting children. Language capable of producing new thought. Productive language. I think that's probably the idea of heuristic language. So he says, the language of heuristic thought. So the language of self-discovery, the language of original thought, where a person discovers truth for themselves, truth from within, but which is nonetheless objective truth. That major literature depends on is too alien. So major literature depends on this language of heuristic thought. To depend on something is to make it a necessary ingredient. Great literature isn't great. There is no great in literature if it doesn't have this heuristic quality, apparently, this vital quality where it can bring you further in your creative growth and thought. Well, Levis says this language is too alien to the American critics. It bears no relation to the human world they know. Makes me wonder what human world they know. Or to the kinds of intellectual apparatus they are familiar with and too practiced in applying. So the suggestion is that the kind of language, the living language, which ought to be able to produce new life, new truth, new moral understanding, new growth. This does not take root in the minds of the American critics he's talking about. It is too different from the human world they know. So if I speak of joy to a person who has never experienced it, it will not produce an answering throb in their heart. If I speak of the love of God and of hearing His voice and wrestling to put my will down and to embrace His, a person who is an atheist who has never cared to think of God might have nothing to compare that experience with. And it says, or to the kinds of intellectual apparatus they are familiar with and too practiced in applying. I wonder if he is talking about the scientific worldview, the idea that the reality is confined to what we can explain, what we can understand exhaustively, what we already know. That would be a very narrow and closed-minded way of perceiving reality. I wonder if that's what he's saying. Certainly, the secular humanist is practiced in applying that kind of mindset. Well, the bottom line of this paragraph, at least is of this half of the paragraph that we just took apart, the bottom line is Levis has no respect for the American authors of his day, who were highly acclaimed, for the American critics, who presumed to criticize British English classics that they didn't understand and weren't capable of appreciating. And that there is essentially no proof that our society is vital and still living, that our civilization is legit, that humanity is growing. So going to the beginning of the paragraph, here then is the significant upshot for us. The situation changes. We're in a new day. The situation constantly changes. It's different now than it was in Levis's day. Probably worse. The situation changes. And to regard change with Professor Plum as the death of the past would be to contemplate with equanimity the death of the present, which the future so rapidly becomes. Death of the past meaning we have no continuous link with the past, no way of seeing what the past means. And then he goes on to say, the roots of tradition do have life. And the roots are in the incomparable literature of the English language, which we are about to study, beginning next week. And of course we've studied it in other courses as well. So let's go back, and I'm just going to page through and remember some of the key concepts that we've touched upon. And if you want to contribute to the discussion, send something on the chat board or on email. But we'll just do a real quick run through from the beginning of whatever my eye falls upon, just by way of summary, and then we'll be finished. Okay, the first page has a heading: Thought, Language, and Objectivity. And we talked quite a bit how thought and language interact, and objectivity from the scientific viewpoint. And I have a lot of notes from Olavo. One of them says, literary language is the foundation of education. Not just academic, but the foundation of a person as a person, able to make moral judgments. Literary language is the foundation of our ability to make moral judgments. A student told me last week that he wanted to fill up the holes in his foundation where literature should be. It's on the ground level of who we are. Also, Olavo says literature is not only content, it's part of a process, a main instrument of understanding human nature, life, and reality. So, as we listen to a story, we hear the content of the story, we learn the details, the facts on the surface. But literature is much more than that. As we live this story. We gain wisdom about life from the story, almost as though the story becomes part of our personal life experience. And we learn about human nature, and we learn about the nature of reality. For example, if in the end of the story someone gets hung, we learn how hard is a rope around the neck, and how just because you love the person getting hung doesn't mean they will survive. Do you see? It shows you how hard reality is. A concept that young people don't necessarily understand when they're born. Okay. Let me see. All right, continuing. He goes on to talk about the fact that major creative writers are concerned with a necessary kind of thought. And he talked a lot about the kind of creative thought which gives birth to new creativity. Sorry. Let's see. I keep seeing more and more about this kind of thought. Okay. Then he goes on to talk about how pessimistic he feels about the state of the students that he is seeing. How in the past, students were able to read a work and engage in judgment and analysis, in critical judgment. And now it's no longer seeming important to the university to require students to do this. And so they're not learning. And he talks quite a bit about how the world seems to be becoming less appreciative of literature as a study and more appreciative of science and math. Then he goes into a long section where he is talking about a book named The Social Sciences as Sorcery, written by a person named Professor Andreski, who was a contemporary of Levis, and who Levis appreciated, even though he was pretty critical of him in the long run. And yet, Andreski was seeing some of the same problems in the study of psychology as Levis was seeing in the study of literature. And in that sense, Levis saw Andreski as an ally. But he thought Andreski was very much blinded by Andreski's own scientific reductionism. Okay, then we went on to talk about Marjorie Green. And her comments. There was a book called The Knower and the Known, which talked about the Cartesian-Newtonian dualism that must be exorcised from the Western mind. An either-or mentality. And Marjorie Green writes a really good little bit in her book talking about quality words, red, feline, colored, which exist as categories, but not specifics. The concept cat, the concept red. I dwell in a coherent, mutually interacting framework of word classes and thing classes. Only within such a frame do individual sounds or written shapes and individual animals become what they are. The power to generalize, which speech demands, is the power to sort out according to effective norms both utterances and natural events. Here we see how language assists thought. Language is indispensable to thought. And it talks about how to tell the difference between this red and that red has a power which defies clear and logical statement. And we talked all about the third order statements, which can't be exhaustively proved, but which everyone knows. Okay, continuing. There was discussion of community and how community agrees on the definitions of words. And as you look at language at any given point in time, you can see a reflection of the values of the community. And in that sense, language itself gives us a snapshot, almost like a fossil record of what humanity was like in an unbroken tradition from the beginning of when we have written literature. And then he talks about how analysis, like judgment and analysis, recreate the conditions within which the original piece was written, so that we can see what life was at that time. Okay. The human world is part of the agreed upon community knowledge. The human world exists in the network of minds of humans. It's not just the objective reality of our tables and our physical apparatus. The human world could be understood as, culture is a big part of it. And we have Polanyi saying, all knowledge falls into one of two classes. It is either tacit or rooted in tacit knowledge. And tacit means unspoken, which means knowledge is deeper than language. And language becomes a vehicle for knowledge which is part of the soul. Which is a cool concept in my mind. Here he's talking about how Andreski doesn't even realize the absurdity of his case. And the dangerousness of the Cartesian alliance. I'll read you a little bit. The dangerousness of Andreski's Cartesian alliance is seen in the way in which he offers to pass off on the reader a plausible but false and obfuscating either or. That was at the bottom of page 41 and the top of 42. Andreski insists on the authority of common sense. He talks about the collaborative creativity of humanity and how life in human life is manifest in language, inseparably from literary creation. Though I call them mine, I know they are not mine. The sense of the muse, of truth, speaking through a human voice. One writes out of one's moral sense for the race. That was D.H. Lawrence. Then there was the long bit about the secret sharer, Conrad, where we learned about moral responsibility as opposed to moral security, which comes from following rules. And how people who speak the same language, who belong to the same spiritual community, speak the same language. Without, page 48, a nuclear live presence of essential responsibility, discipline, and code would be no better than mechanical habit. And the mechanical can deal only with the routine and the expected. So, the living core of creativity is necessary for human governance. Other than that, we're governed by robots. And robots and legalism can only handle the routine, not the special cases where wisdom and a judge are required. Human responsibility, page 49. Known to Lawrence and Conrad, is the manifest potency of life. Human responsibility is the potency of life that we see, that is manifest. Potency meaning the ability to give rise to further life. The thinking of all great writers is distinctive, but also universal. It's as unique as the individual speaker, but all of truth conforms to truth. I think that's very cool. And all the truth that has been articulated through the great writers belongs to a continuity of manifested truth. We're on page 40. I'm on page 49 here. We then go on to talk about the disease that comes along with the American tide of industrialization. And I think we decided that the disease was in being cut off from the history, cut off from the wisdom accumulated in mankind until the present, and having it replaced with shallow roots of scientific success and technological advancement, progressivism in a very shallow sense, which came from America, but Levis said had its origin in Great Britain. And then we end up with the fact that Levis is offering no syllabus, no prescription, just a guiding star and a hope that people will follow the guiding star and lead others to produce an educated public capable of preserving what is best in humanity so that humanity can continue. And that pretty much brings us to where we are now. Any comments? Any last feedback? This is your chance. I'm going to give you a few minutes to reply, and I'll come back in 5 minutes. And if you haven't said anything, then I'll log off, and next week we will begin the practical imagination.
Margarita, I've been reading a book where it's written, "The Zionists pulled one over you." Please, what does it mean?
The question is, there's a phrase, the Zionists pulled one over you, right?
Yeah.
The Zionists pulled one over. Does it say on you?
Yeah.
On you. That means to fool you, to deceive you, to tell a lie to you. It comes from the idea of pulling the wool over your eyes, like pulling your hat down to cover your eyes so that you can't see what's really happening. So if they pulled one over on you, it means they took advantage of you by telling you some kind of an untruth.
Margarita, since we are here studying Levis as a consequence of your meeting with Olavo, could you tell us, if possible, how you met him and became his English teacher?
Okay. The question is, how did I meet Olavo and become his English teacher? Well, I was only his English teacher for a pretty short time, but I'll tell you how we met. Really, the story goes back 21 years, even though I've only known Olavo maybe 5 years. 21 years ago, my husband and I were missionary trainees in seminary, and we hoped to live a life of missionary service, bringing Christ to the world. And when I had my first baby, I had the crib where she slept underneath a map of the world. And when I would stand over the baby, patting her on the back so that she would sleep and not cry, I would look up at the map and pray for the world. And I would pray for a different part of the world all the time. I had the whole map in front of me, and of course, as a new mother, I spent a lot of time standing over the crib, patting the baby on the back. And while I prayed, I often would pray for the baby, because the place we were going as missionaries was very dangerous. It was possible that my husband or my children or my child or I myself could die from terrorists, or even from the situation, because it was in the jungle and there were tarantulas that could show up in your bed. So during those years, I prayed for the world, and I gave up the baby to be a world Christian and to love God and to take Christ to the world also. Well, when the baby was maybe 4 years old, my husband lost his faith in God. And we stopped being missionaries, and the children grew up in America. But I was always a missionary at heart, and I always loved the people of the world wanting to be out among the world. And when my daughter grew up, well, all our lives we had had people from all over the world coming into our home. Missionaries would come and visit us. We knew lots of missionaries. And they would come through and they would visit and tell their stories. And I took my daughter when she was 16 on a mission trip over to Moldova. And my daughter really liked international people. So when she went to college, there were only a few internationals at her college, and one of them was a girl named Isabella, who was almost like a daughter to Olavo. And Michelle became friends with Isabella, mainly because Isabella was foreign, and my daughter was drawn to people who were from other countries. And almost all of her friends were from other countries. And Isabella invited Michelle home to meet Olavo. And Michelle attended a seminar with Olavo. And it was all in Portuguese, but they had translation. And Michelle was so enthralled with Olavo that she brought me to come to a seminar. And I went and I met Olavo. And at that time, Olavo had a son named Pedro, who I think they were a little worried about Pedro because he was partying too much, going out and drinking, something like this. So someone asked me if I would consider homeschooling Pedro with my children. And I considered it, but we never actually worked that out. But Pedro became a regular visitor and close friend of my children. And in fact, Pedro did take some classes with me. And Olavo also asked me to come and teach him some English, and I went. And we began to invite Olavo and his family and all of the Brazilian friends that came through to our house for holidays, like Thanksgiving and Christmas, New Year's. And basically from there, friendship just grew and developed. And then when my marriage broke up and my husband left, I was thinking about selling our family home, and Olavo said, "Don't sell the home." And Alessandro came up with the idea that we could do an English class, try to make some money to be able to keep the house. And you know what happened since then. We've had this class, and now we're hoping to make a website with self-study English materials for the students who aren't quite up to English for philosophy students. So thank you for asking. That's my story. Any other questions anyone wants to ask today? And I'll just tell you that you can ask any questions like this anytime. And if you email them to me, I might get it if you email me through the website. But I'll definitely get it if you email me through my personal website, which is Margarita Noyes. No, it's margarita.noyes @gmail.com. If you use the email address, the Seminario de Filosofia email address, I may not see the email because mainly that address is for PayPal, for business purposes. So I don't check it very much. But this one is my personal email, and you can speak to me anytime, and I'll reply either on the class or personally. Okay, see you later. See you next week with the first lesson in English for Philosophy students, short stories. See you next week.